He said, "You're going to spoil him." Not cruelly, quietly, standing in the doorway of Ari's room while I sat on the edge of his bed with my hand on his back. Ari had been upset, and I'd gone to him. That's all. And my husband had stood there and said it. And something in my chest went cold. Not because I thought he was wrong to say it, because I wasn't sure anymore whether he was right. I'm Ma, Ari, and Maya's mom, and I want to talk about the argument that lives inside most households and never quite gets finished, the one about how to raise them, the one that comes back in different clothes every few weeks, the one where nobody is the villain, and somehow it still leaves you both feeling alone. I noticed something before I had a name for it. Ari is different depending on who's in the room. With me, he's looser, more emotional, quicker to tears, and quicker to recover. He'll come and find me over something small, and I'll sit with him, and 5 minutes later, it's gone and he's running back to whatever he was doing. He doesn't edit himself. He just arrives fully and trusts that I can hold whatever he's brought with him. With my husband, he's more contained, a little watchful. He composes himself before he speaks, smooths it down, not because he's frightened, because he's reading the room, because he knows what that room expects of him, and he rises to meet it. I thought at first that was just Ari being perceptive. Children read the room. That's normal. That's healthy even. But then I started to notice something else. He'd pause sometimes in the hallway between us, just for a second, like he was making a decision before he walked through the door. And I realized Ari wasn't reading the room. Ari was becoming the room, deciding who to be, choosing which version of himself to bring. And that decision, that small, constant, 7-year-old calculation, was costing him something. I could see it. I just couldn't name it yet. My husband and I aren't arguing about Ari. We never have been. We're arguing about safety, about what it looks like, about what it felt like when we were children and someone was in charge. He grew up in a house where structure meant love, where clear expectations and firm consequences meant someone cared enough to mean it. You knew where the lines were, and knowing where the lines were meant, you could relax inside them. Boundaries weren't cold. They were proof that you mattered enough to be held to something. I grew up watching Nana, who believed something different, that a child who feels heard doesn't need to act out to be noticed, that the connection comes first and the behavior follows, that you can hold a child gently and still hold them firmly. That warmth and meaning it are not opposites. Neither of us is wrong. Both of us are speaking from the deepest thing we know about love, the thing that was handed to us before we had words for it. And we keep having the same argument because we're using the same words, boundaries, consistency, respect, and meaning completely different things. And neither of us has ever stopped long enough in the middle of it to show the other one what we actually mean. There was an afternoon that shifted something. I was in the kitchen, and I could hear Ari and Maya in the sitting room. Maya had knocked something over, nothing serious, just one of those small accidents, and she'd started to whimper the way she does. And I heard Ari, very calmly, very matter-of-factly, say to her, "Don't cry like that. Ari's dad doesn't like it when you cry like that." He wasn't being unkind. He wasn't repeating something cruel he'd heard. He was passing on what he'd worked out. He was translating one parent for the other, preparing her, managing the gap between us. A 7-year-old was quietly, carefully doing the work 2 adults should have been doing together. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment, and then I went and found my husband, and I said, "We have to fix this, not for us, for him. We agreed to align on our approach. That was the phrase we used, align on our approach. We had that conversation for about 40 minutes. We did not align. We ordered a takeaway and didn't speak about it again for 3 weeks. But here's what I finally understood, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit. We weren't arguing about parenting. Stay with me, because once I saw this, everything about those arguments changed. We weren't arguing about whether to be gentle or firm. We were arguing about what makes a child feel safe, and we had 2 completely different answers, built from 2 completely different childhoods that we had never actually shown each other. I asked him one evening, properly asked him, not in the middle of an argument, not when we were already dug in. I asked him what it felt like when he was a child and the rules were clear, when someone held a line. He went quiet for a moment, and then he said, "It felt like someone was paying attention." And I sat with that for a long time, because I'd spent years thinking his firmness was the opposite of what I was doing, the counter-argument, the thing I had to balance out or soften around the edges. But it wasn't. It was a different expression of the same thing. Both of us trying to make Ari feel held. Both of us trying to say, you matter enough that we're going to mean it, just with different hands, different words, different memories of what love looked like when we were the ones being raised. The problem was never the method. The problem was the gap between the methods, because Ari could feel it. Children always can. They don't know what inconsistency means, but they feel it in their body. They feel it as, the people who love me most haven't agreed, and a child who feels that doesn't feel safer with 2 approaches. They feel less safe, because the gap itself becomes the message. We don't know either, and no child should have to carry that. I told Nana we were struggling to agree on where the lines were. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Your father and I disagreed on everything for about 6 years. I asked her how they got through it. She said, we stopped arguing in front of the children and started arguing in the garden instead." She paused. The roses have never looked better. Ari settled it in the end, in the way that only he can. He came home from school one afternoon, dropped his bag in the hallway, and announced, completely unprompted, "Mummy says feelings are important. Ari's dad says we don't make a fuss. I've decided to feel my feelings quietly." He was 7. He'd already written the manual we were still arguing about. I want to say something to every parent watching this who has had that argument, the one that keeps coming back in different clothes. You are not too soft. Your partner is not too hard. You are 2 people who love the same child and learned love in different languages, and your child is not confused because one of you is wrong. They are confused because the 2 of you haven't found the sentence you can both say together. Yet, that sentence exists. And it starts not with agreeing on every rule, but with agreeing on the thing underneath the rules. What do you both want your child to feel? Safe? Seen, capable of getting it wrong and still being loved, held even when the answer is no? Because when you find that, the actual shared thing, the real common ground underneath the different methods, the methods matter so much less than you thought. The gap closes, not because you became the same kind of parent, but because you finally understood what the other one was actually trying to build. And your child stops doing the maths in the hallway, because the hallway finally feels like the same house. If tonight you and your partner are sitting in the same silence you've sat in before, the Clash of Parenting Methods Guide is the step-by-step of how to find the sentence you can both say, Not to win the argument, to end it, for good, for Aries' sake, for Maya's sake, for yours. Click the first link in the pinned comment right now, tonight, before the next argument puts on its clothes and comes back around. There's something else I haven't mentioned, because just when my husband and I started to find our footing, just when we were finally speaking the same language, someone else walked into the room. She didn't knock, she never knocks, and she had very strong opinions about sugar, about bedtimes, about the fact that we were, in her view, making the whole thing far too complicated. But that's a whole other conversation.